Welcome to Esoteric Truth on Esoteric Truth Radio. I'm your host, Trinity. I want to put a disclaimer in here before I get started. This is, I want to say, widely known, or at least it should be. Found out about this years ago, considering it's at least 30 years old. A lot of the stuff that's going to be presented is heartbreaking. It's shocking, to say the least. And I guarantee you're going to walk away with something, but please be prepared. This is going to be 1 hour of a discussion concerning the ties and the connections with politics, child prostitution, blackmail, FBI, CIA, Iran-Contra, money, drugs, you name it, it's going to be here. This is going to be the Franklin scandal, which is based on the movie The Conspiracy of Silence, that there's only one copy floating on the internet. It has been for many, many years. You could find it, just put the Franklin scandal or put in Conspiracy of Silence. It's a very shoddy, crappy video, but there's a reason for that. This video was supposed to be, it's not a video, it's a documentary that was released concerning the entire scandal. They had original press footage, they had everything you can think of, and it got pulled. Not only did it get pulled, but someone anonymously bought out the entire production documentary rights altogether and destroyed it. There's only one circulating copy. It's 1980s quality, VHS quality, but if you want to see it for what it is, then I say take a look. You'll be more than shocked. I can't present every bit of that information, but the couple of examples that I am going to use, they all kind of tie into what's going on today. I want to start this off by saying a particular number, and that number is 100,000. Now, 100,000 is approximately the amount of children that are missing from the United States every year, not worldwide, in the United States. And I have for many years been telling that to people, and nobody wants to listen. First thing they say is, well, the news doesn't tell me that. How come that's not on CNN? How come nobody's actually stated this? Why isn't it making the mainstream news or in every newspaper in the world? Because that's not how it works. That's not how the system works. We hear about maybe one child a week, maybe, okay? And they pick and choose who gets discussed. Whose picture they're going to plaster all over the place. We have Amber Alerts now. We have all that stuff, but nobody's telling us the true number of children that are missing in the United States every year. And that number is 100,000, okay? It's 100,000. Look it up. Look it up. Find out how many kids are actually missing in your state. Find out what's going on, because I guarantee you're not going to believe my number. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to go and I want you to look for yourself. 100,000 children. Most of them don't get found. Those parts are true. When they tell you after a certain amount of time, there's a possibility your child's not going to be found. All of that stuff is legit. They just don't want to tell you how many of those children are actually missing and how many don't come back. I'm assuming that everybody kind of knows that there's an entire child trafficking scenario that happens worldwide, especially in the United States. That's huge here. People want to ignore that. Some of the stuff I'll be bringing up is also concerning child protective services as being part in helping this kind of a scenario, including in this case. In this case, a lot of the kids that were being taken were from Boys Town. A lot of the kids that were being taken were foster children. Kids that nobody is going to look for. Kids that don't have parents that are looking out for them or a family or anything like that. These are the kids that are most at risk. These are the kids that are most at risk. And you can do a little bit of research about this as well. I want to say a theory. I'm going to go with the word theory. I'm going to say that there's a theory going around that not only is this absolutely widespread with children that don't have anybody that'll look for them, that they wind up missing and nobody will even notice that they're gone. All they have to do is remove their paperwork. But there is now something going around that states, and this I'm going to mention, but I'm not 100% verifying it, but that certain states, Child Protective Services, will pull children from your home with false allegations and then immediately put up your child for adoption. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is not just because we already know that happens, but they do it to look for particular children, not just any child, like kids with disabilities or anything like that. These kids are not the ones they're looking for. A lot of the time, they're looking for specific mixed children and the typical blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. They take a lot of those kids and they don't return them to the parents. With false allegations, with courts being involved, this is a lot bigger than most people actually know. And listen, you can take it or leave it as far as I'm concerned. But I'm going to give you some information today that's 100% verifiable that may change your mind about what it is that you actually hear and if my story is BS. Because the, not only is the ring huge, there's a lady, she was an ex congressman named Nancy Schaefer. Now, she came out a couple of years back. She was in the state of Georgia. She was trying to be elected to be Georgia man. And you can find her videos as well. She was widely exposing everything I just said, including the taking of children from their homes, being misplaced. That there are cases where Child Protective Services will come into your home and take your kid and then not know where they went. Like literally say that they lost the paperwork and they can't find your kid. A lot of the cases are crap. There's almost no protection for parents nowadays who get charges filed against them. They don't tell you who did it. They come up with the allegations, but they don't have to tell you who made the allegations. It could have been anybody. It could have been nobody. Nobody knows. But for some reason, those who want to make a case against parents and those parents who lose their children on false allegations, the people that made the allegations have more protection than the parents. Okay, I think New York is the only one that if they come to your house and they find out that that the story was untrue, they can tell you after 30 days. If the case is unfounded, they will tell you within 30 days whether or not, not whether or not, but who it was that made the allegation, and then you could press charges against that person. I think that's the only state. Even if it wasn't, it should be every state. It should be every state that has that protection for the parents, especially when somebody's just angry. And I've seen that happen so many times where, you know, you have a fight with somebody, you have a fight with a neighbor, and all of a sudden, Child Protective Services at your house. You know, there's literally thousands of cases where parents are like, I didn't do anything wrong. I let them in my house and they took my kids anyway. And I don't know what to do. You know, you spend more time trying to get your kid back. A lot of the time there's rush adoptions, especially for younger children. Kids under the age of 2 are at most at risk for getting for getting adopted immediately. And I'm talking about within a week, they put these kids up for adoption. And then, of course, they have to close court papers that don't have to tell you who adopted your kid. I mean, it's literally a shitstorm of crap that you just got to keep going around in circles. And there's so many parents right now that are trying to get rights for themselves. She wound up making a video coming out against CPS and saying that the whole system was corrupt, that they were selling children, they were taking children, all of this stuff. And of course, what happened to her? She's dead. She's dead and her husband is dead. They wound up getting shot in their home and killed. And this is almost immediately afterwards when she actually publicly came out and said this. And there's just a few videos of her doing town meetings and such. And she knew what she was talking about. She was like, I see it. I'm in contact with these parents. There's a court case where a judge just got indicted because he was getting payoffs from private corporations that own juvenile facilities. So he would charge a child, let's say a kid stole a candy bar, and he would charge the kid with 6 months in juvie. And then he would get a kickback from the actual facility the kid was placed in. And he did it to dozens of kids. So, like I said, the corruption, you just got to find out where it's at. But I'm going to go into the Franklin scandal. I didn't really mean to go off on a rant on this one. But, okay, so apparently in June 29th of 1989, pandemonium erupted in the corridors of power in the nation's capital. Homosexual prostitution probe ensnares official of Bush Reagan, screamed the front page headline of the Washington Times with the kicker, call boys took midnight tour of the White House. The Times reported a homosexual prostitution ring is under investigation by federal and district authorities and includes amongst its clients key officials of the Reagan and Bush administrations, military officers, congressional aides, and U.S. and foreign businessmen with close ties to Washington's political elite. The expose centered on the role of one Craig Spence, a Republican power broker known for his lavish power cocktail parties. Spence was well connected. He celebrated Independence Day in 1988 by conducting a midnight tour of the White House in the company of 2 teenage male prostitutes, among others, in his party. Rumors circulated that a list existed of some 200 Washington prominents who had used the call boy service. The number 2 in charge of personal affairs at the White House, who was responsible for filling all the top civil service posts in the federal bureaucracy, and Secretary of Labor, Elizabeth Doyle's chief of staff, were 2 individuals publicly identified as patrons of the call boy ring. Two of the ring's call boys were allegedly KGB operatives, according to a retired general from the Defense Intelligence Agency interviewed by the press. But the evidence seemed to point to a CIA sexual blackmail operation instead. Spence's entire mansion was covered with hidden microphones, two-way mirrors, and video cameras, ever ready to capture the indiscretions of Washington's high, mighty, and established. Any kinkiness goes, so long as you don't get caught. The popular proverb was that the only way a politician could hurt his career was if he were caught with a dead woman or a live boy in his bed. Months after the scandal had died down, a few weeks before he allegedly committed suicide, Spence was asked who had given him the key to the White House. The Washington Times reported that Mr. Spence hinted the tours were arranged by top-level persons, including Donald Gregg, National Security Advisor to the Vice President Bush the first, and later U.S. Ambassador to South Korea. We already had occasion to examine Don Gregg's role in Iran-Contra and have observed his curious performance when testifying under oath before congressional committees. Gregg indignantly denied any connection to Spence, yet it is public record that Spence had sponsored a dinner in Gregg's honor in the spring of 1989 at Washington's posh Four Seasons Hotel in Georgetown. George Bush was less than pleased with the media coverage of the prostitution charges and kept abreast of the scandal as it mushroomed. The Washington Times reported an article titled "White House Mute on Callboy Scandal" that late-night visits and Mr. Spence's links to a homosexual prostitution ring under the investigation by federal authorities since they were disclosed since June 29th in the Washington Times. But top officials will not discuss the story's substance. Reportedly even amongst themselves. Press officers had rebuffed repeated requests to obtain Mr. Bush's reaction and declined to discuss investigations or fallout from the disclosures. By midsummer, the scandal had been buried. The president had managed to avoid giving a single press conference where he would surely have been asked to comment. As the callboy ring affair dominated the cocktail gossip circuit in Washington, another scandal halfway across the country in the state of Nebraska peaked. Again, this scandal knocked on the president's door. A black Republican who had been a leader in organizing minority support for the president in 1988's campaign and who proudly displayed a photo of himself and the president arm in arm in his Omaha home was at the center of a sex and money scandal that continues to rock the Cornhusker state. The scandal originated with the collapse of the minority-oriented Franklin Committee Credit Union in Omaha, directed by Lawrence E. King, Jr., a nationally influential black Republican who sang the national anthem at both the 1984 and 1988. King became the subject of the Nebraska Senate's investigation conducted by the specifically created Franklin Committee to probe charges of embezzlement. In November of 1988, King's offices were raided by the FBI and $40 million was discovered missing. Within weeks, the Nebraska Senate, which initially opened the inquiry to find out where the money had gone, instead found itself questioning young adults and teenagers who said that they had been child prostitutes. Social workers and state care administrators accused King of running a child prostitution ring. The charges grew with the former police chief of Omaha, the publisher of the state's largest daily newspaper, and several other political associates of King, finding themselves accused of patronizing the child prostitution ring. King is now serving a 15-year federal prison sentence for defrauding the Omaha-based credit union. But the magazines Avimiente of Italy and Pronto of Spain, among others, have charged that King's crimes were more serious, that he ran a national child prostitution ring that serviced the political and business elite of both Republican and Democratic parties. Child victims of King's operations charged him with participation in at least one satanic ritual murder of a child several years ago. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Village Voice, and the National Law Journal covered the full range of accusations after the story broke in November in 1988. King's money was also linked to the Iran-Contra affair, and some say that King provided the CIA with information garnered from his alleged activities as a pimp for the high and mighty. Lawrence King was no stranger to President Bush, and Lawrence King was no stranger to Craig Spence. Several of the Omaha child prostitutes testified that they had traveled to Washington, D.C. with King in private planes to attend political events, which were followed by sex parties. King and Spence had much in common. Not only were they both Republican Party activists, but they had gone into business together procuring prostitutes for Washington's elites. Bush's name had repeatedly surfaced in the Nebraska scandal, but his name was first put into print in July of 1989, a little less than a month after the Washington callboy affair had made headlines, Omaha's leading daily newspaper reported one child who has never been under psychiatric care is said to believe she saw George Bush at one of the king's parties. A full 3 years after the scandal had first made headlines, Bush's name came again, and it appeared in print. In Gentleman's Quarterly, which is GQ, carried a lengthy article viewed by many political observers in Nebraska as an attempt to refute the charges, which would not die. Despite the termination of all official inquiries, the GQ piece disputed the allegations as a conspiracy theory that went out of control and resonated because of some mystical psychological phenomena allegedly unique to Nebraskan rural folk who will believe anything and burn with the mistrust of city life that once inflamed the prairie with populist passion. Numerous polls over the last few years have recorded over 90% people saying they believe there has been a cover-up of the truth. So as I said, he got busted. They made all the ties. They made all the connections. They were foster children that had gotten polygraph tests. There was two sisters. I don't want to give their first name, but the last name was Webb. And they were the main witnesses. They had gotten polygraph tests done 4 times and passed all 4 times. They said that they went with Mr. King, Mrs. King, and their son Prince on trips. They traveled all over the U.S. Like I said, I don't want to get into too much specific concerning the abuse, but the girls were mistreated. They were handled in a sense where we know better. They should have known better. And I'm sure they didn't think that they were going to be kids from foster care that anybody was going to actually listen to. Right now, one of the girls, they live in the Midwest and they have kids and stuff like that, and they moved on with their lives and such. And of course, we already know what happened with the Bushes and with the Danny Craig, Greggs, all of these other people. They go ahead and they just move from place to place to place to place to place, but they don't actually sit there and get held responsible for these kinds of things. Here's another case, and this is one that I have studied on. I have the copies of the police reports and such, and this is another thing where kids are being taken. There are people, there really are. I know that there's a huge problem with people and the way that police officers are, and I'm not always a big fan. We always see them, beating or harassing or shooting, murdering people. I mean, it's horrific. I don't put them all in that bubble. There are some people that have tried to help, and they get shut down. They have to deal with the same crap that civilians have to deal with, especially the really good cops that are out there and really want to help people out. This case is called the Finders case. Now, a book was written about it, and there's a lot of information concerning this. There's only one circulating police report. It's very lengthy, by the way. It gives all the information on what they saw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the reports and give you pretty much the gist of it. And you're going to see that not only has this happened more than once, it just continues to happen till this day. Okay, then we have the story of the Finders. This was yet another scary as hell story, and is closer to the Franklin case as far as perpetrators and the connection that lies in the eye of those that tried to tell the truth and were silenced. This is a quote from newspapers, and just look for the Finders in a search, and there are actually copies and stuff. Custom officials said their links to the D.C. area led authorities into a far-reaching investigation that includes the Finders, a group of about 40 people that court documents allege is led by a man named Marion Petit, and their various homes, including the duplex apartment in Glover Park, the Northwest Washington warehouse, and a 90-acre farm in rural Madison County, Virginia. It was the U.S. News and World Report that would ultimately provide the follow-up to the Finder story, noting that there was a certain Customs Service memorandum that was written at the time of the original investigation, written by Ramon Ramirez, Special Agent, United States Customs Service, describing 2 adult white males and 6 minor children ages 7 years to 2 years. The adult males were Michael Hallahan and Douglas Ammerman, both of Washington, D.C., who had been arrested the previous day of charges of child abuse. The children were covered with insect bites, were very dirty. Most of the children were not wearing underpants, and all of the children had not been bathed in many days. The men were somewhat evasive under questioning and stated only that they were the children's teachers and were en route to Mexico to establish a school for brilliant children. The children were unaware of the functions of a telephone, television, and toilets, and stated that they were not allowed to live indoors and were only given the food as a reward. A Detective Bradley had initiated an investigation of the 2 addresses provided by the Tallahassee Police Department during December of 1986. An informant had given him information regarding the cult known as the Finders, operating various businesses out of a warehouse located at 1307 4th Street Northeast, and were supposed to be housing children at 3918 and 3920 West, South, Northwest. The information was specific in describing blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children and a yet unsolved murder in which the finders might be involved. Cursory examination of documents revealed detailed instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes. The instructions included the impregnation of female members of the community, purchasing children, trade, and kidnapping. There were telex messages using MCI account numbers between a computer terminal believed to be in the same room and others located across the country and in foreign locations. There were pictures of new children and adult finders, as well as evidence of high-tech money transfers. There was a file named Pentagon Break-In and references to activities in Moscow, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia, North Vietnam, North Korea, Africa, London, Germany, Europe, and the Bahamas. There was also a file named Palestinian. One such telex specifically ordered the purchases of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact in the Chinese embassy there. Other documents identified interest in high-tech transfers to the UK, numerous properties under the control of the finders, a keen interest in terrorism, explosives, and the evasion of law enforcement. There was also a set of instructions that appeared to broadcast via computer an advisory to the parts of the children moving through different jurisdictions and instructions on how to avoid police detection. A photo album contained a series of photos of adults and children dressed in white sheets participating in a blood ritual. The ritual centered around the execution of at least 2 goats. The photos portrayed the execution, disembowelment, skinning, and dismemberment of the goats at the hands of the children. This was included the removal of the testes of a male goat, the discovery of a female goat's womb and the baby goat inside the womb, and the presentation of the goat's head to one of the children. There was also a large amount of data collected on various child care organizations. The warehouse contained a huge library, 2 kitchens, a sauna, hot tub, and a video room. The video room seemed to be set up as an indoctrination center. The organization had the ability to produce its own videos. There appeared to be training areas for the children and what appeared to be an altar set up in a residential area of the warehouse. Many jars of urine and feces were located in this area. Group leader Marion Petit spoke in an interview in Steam Shovel Press in 1998, noting that in World War II, he kept house to intelligence people in Washington and OSS people passing through. Official U.S. Customs investigation reports, which have been completely authenticated by the investigating officers who wrote them and by a well-respected investigator who personally knows these customs officials, are irrefutable evidence that a case of obvious child neglect, abuse, including child pedophile, sexual abuse, child pornography, satanic cult ritualistic abuse, wherein the perpetrators were caught directly in the act by law enforcement, arrested on the basis of irrefutable evidence at the scene, and face serious charges which typically bring sentences of decades in prison. Search warrants were obtained for the Finders Cult office in Washington, D.C., and a complete search was enacted by law enforcement, which provided irrefutable pictures, movies, and documents of such abuse and neglect, evidence, and access to the confidential arrest reports on the Finders Cult from the arrest in Tallahassee, which occurred only a day earlier, suggesting very high-level connections to U.S. intelligence in and of itself. All investigation of the Finders Cult by the FBI, U.S. Customs, and local law enforcement was stopped by the U.S. Justice Department on the grounds of national security, and the matter of the Finders Cult was turned over to the Central Intelligence Agency as an internal security matter. Since the Finders is and has been a domestic and international covert operation of the CIA, any and all investigations of the Finders was immediately stopped. All evidence was suppressed and denied, and the abused children were released back to the adult perpetrators who had been arrested in the act, and the CIA resumed its ongoing covert operations of the Finders Cult, which is used to procure and produce. The story of the Finders Cult is the story of the development of child assets to be used to entrap politicians and diplomats, corporate and law enforcement officials, to sell child victims to wealthy perverts to raise money for covert operations, to train some of the children and victims to be professional operatives and assassins of a totally cold, multiple personality, mind-controlled nature. To date, only one media outlet has dared publish anything about this, and that's the U.S. News. In the last few years, there have been more smoking guns proving that U.S. intelligence agencies traffic in children, sell them, and abuse them. Some of these covert operations have been tied to long-term and massive importation and distribution of narcotics into the U.S. by the same intelligence agencies. And last but not least, the case of Nancy Schaefer, which I mentioned earlier, and the murder-suicide with the child trafficking that she tried to actually announce. Like I said, there are people that are trying to help out. Um, they do this in the form and in the manner where, if you read up on most cases where children are being removed, a lot of the time, and this hurts me to say, because I know that I've read these things and there are people that refuse to go into the realm of this type of topic, and I get it and I understand it. And even if it has to be only 5 people that do the research, it has to get out. It has to get out. This kills me every time I have to have these types of discussions. Not only do they go without false allegations into your home and take your children, not only is there an opportunity for your child to just be playing in the park and your child to get grabbed, or some kind of ridiculous scenario where we literally have to feel like we can't let our kids go play outside, but there's also the allegations of abuse that happen at home by parents, whether it's a mother or a father or both parents that are abusing a child. If authorities find out that your child was already being abused, they have more leverage on the parents. So they can come into your home and say, listen, we know that you're abusing kid X. We're going to remove them from the home, and we're not going to arrest you or anything like that as long as you stay quiet. Just don't say anything to anybody. You know, your kid went off to a family member's house, and just avoid it as much as you can. Now, the reason for this in a lot of cases, and like I said, look it up yourself. Look it up yourself. It's not going to stop me from saying what I have to say, but do the research yourself. Okay? A lot of these children have to go through a form of mind control or a form of brainwashing in order for them to adapt to horrific situations. It's a lot easier for them to come into a home of a child that's already been abused, because they've already hit that point. They already had that point done with them, and the kids at this point are just happy not to be where they were. You know what I'm saying? So they take them from the home and they put them, in a different type of environment that's away from the home. But the brainwashing process of tearing the child down in order to rebuild them is already halfway done. So the parents or the parent wants to avoid, prosecution and avoid, being in jail. So they agree with whichever agency approaches them that as long as they stay quiet, they avoid being prosecuted, they avoid jail time, they avoid their reputations being ruined. This happens more than almost any other form of than taking kids out of a home. It's scary. It's really, really, really scary because, like I said, nobody cares about the kids. Nobody cares about the kids. If the kid's already gone, and you already know that you're already scot free, you're already free. That leaves more criminals on the street, less people being held accountable. And nobody says anything. Nobody says anything. And you know what? Everybody that does, including Nancy Schaefer, she was a former state senator. She was trying to be the mayor of a state. All she was trying to do was make sure that people started to listen and started to realize that we had to find a way for parents to fight back, to get their children, to take these false allegations and start holding people responsible that make shit up about you and your kids. And what happened to her? Gunned down. Gunned down. And of course, they can't find out who did it. It was a murder suicide. All of Nobody wants to actually look into what it is that happened to her. My next case is this one is it was supposedly the most expensive criminal court case in history. And this was called the McMartin Trial. There was a movie. There was a couple of movies. There's a bunch of books. And HBO had did a documentary. The first time I heard about this, I had seen the documentary. I didn't research at the time. I was younger, and I didn't research anything. And I was completely on the side of the persons that were actually involved. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about it so, you could be up to it. Look into it yourself. There's a lot of information. I mean, tons of information because there was 2 trials. And then by the third time, because they kept having hung juries, by the last time, they were like, we can't keep prosecuting. We can't. The state didn't want to pay for it anymore or anything like that. But this is how one case could lead you into another case. A lot of things that happen aren't that coincidental. One lady wound up dead, and they come to find out that her son was the one who made the very first allegation during the McMartin trial. And she was the one that was pursuing it the most. This is how the whole thing started. I'm going to go into that with you right now. The McMartin preschool abuse trial the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history, should serve as a cautionary tale. When it was all over, the government had spent 7 years and $15 million investigating and prosecuting a case that led to no convictions. More seriously, the McMartin case hundreds of emotionally damaged children, as well as ruined careers for members of the McMartin staff. No one paid a bigger price than Ray Buckley, one of the principal defendants in the case, who spent 5 years in jail awaiting trial for a crime most people recognize today he never committed. As far as the McMartin trial, there was a family, a couple of employees that had a preschool. And after one allegation from a child who went home and had a complaint about their private area bleeding, it wound up opening a can of worms. 200 parents were eventually contacted concerning the abuse or the allegations of abuse, and were asked to come in with their children and have a 2-hour interview with social workers. Now, here's the thing about this case, and the reason why I'm not going to read from excerpts concerning the case. The case went on for 7 years. It cost $15 million, 2 hung juries, parents in an uproar, people completely divided on who's innocent and who's guilty. The part that's the worst, as far as I'm concerned with the reading that I've done about this, is how social workers got involved with this. When I had initially seen the movie, I was like, I can't believe social workers could coerce kids like that. I didn't think that there was a possibility that the kids would tell you the truth, and that the actual caseworkers were the ones that were actually not coercing them and making it seem that way in order to discredit the kids. There was 200 kids that got called in, and almost every single child said that it had happened to them. And they made up some. I didn't want to say make up, but they came up with some seriously outlandish information, including hidden tunnels underneath the house that went to a neighbor's home, animal sacrifice, blood sacrifice, animals. You name it, and these kids were saying it. A couple of the kids wound up having a chlamydia, which of course you already know how that all works. They were saying that the kids were coerced, that one kid might have talked to another kid. Like I said, this is in the 80s, when everybody's neighbor talked to everybody else's neighbor, but nobody was paying attention to the kids. This kind of case brought about a lot of the stuff that we see today, where people do not want to listen to the story that the child has to say. There's easy ways to discredit children, and a place where we can actually say that they don't have any credibility. They have no credibility. That right now we can do something completely outlandish, and because it's something that people won't believe, we can do what we want because nobody will ever believe that it's true. So, especially in the early 80s to the early 90s, these cases were coming out of everywhere, literally everywhere. The National Center for Child Abuse and Neglect started coming out with new ways to deal with people and how we have to treat parents, and nobody wanted their baby. Even me, never, not once, did I take my kids to a sitter. Not once. Terrified of leaving my kids with anyone because of cases like this. And even though they let him go, they let his family go, he did 5 years in jail. They charged him with like 77 counts of abuse. He spent 5 years, and I guess they went back, and it was a hung jury. When they went back and asked the jury, did you think that he was guilty? Who did? Who thought he was guilty? And 6 of those people raised their hand, and they were like, we know he did something. We're absolutely 100% sure that he did something. But if all of us can't agree on it, then we have to have a hung jury. And like I said, 7 years. Which court case took 7 years? But this changed the laws. This changed our processes. This is how we have something called fast track. And that's an immediate rush on trials. We don't want to waste time anymore. We don't want to do any of these things. But what this did was cause social workers, the way the psychologist works, the way that they discuss things with children, and how to get certain pieces of information, how your reputation can actually go down the toilet. Because believe it or not, the guy's name was Ray Buckley. Even though he did 5 years in jail, whether he was innocent or he was guilty, he still did the 5 years. If he was innocent, then we just took a bunch of his life. And if we let him go after 5 years, then we're the sickest part of society at this point, that allowed him to constantly walk the streets after 77 children came out against him. So either way, somebody's getting screwed. But we changed how the process worked. We changed how false memory syndrome out of this case that came about, where it's believed that if you say certain words, this is something called neurolinguistic programming and the way the hypnotism works. This is how the whole thing had gotten divided by actually trying to convince people that, well, not try to convince them, because in all actuality, it can happen. It does happen. It happens every single day. So what we do is we pull our kids away from other people. We don't want to put them in daycare. We don't want to leave them with neighbors. We don't want to leave them with family members. But when you go ahead and you go in that direction, we take them into something else, which is, let's say, television. We rather leave our kids at home with a sandwich and a TV than take them to a sitter. And then we're not paying attention to what the TV is teaching our kids. So either way, we go down a horrible, horrible, horrible rabbit hole. After that case, they looked for the tunnels. There's a big old thing going on with that, because some people are saying there were tunnels, some people are saying that they weren't. They called archaeologists to come in. Some people say that they found 77 animal bones. Other people are like, no, they lived somewhere by a burial ground, like a pet cemetery, and that's where all the animal, bones came from. 7 years of dismay, 7 years of disgust, 7 years of putting over 200 children through that case. And you could just imagine what the parents were going through, just trying to have somebody understand that you have to stand up for your kids, which they absolutely did. They stood up for their kids and they spoke out. The initial parent that did speak out wound up being shot to death. And then everything just started snowballing after that. So at this point, we already know that people like Nancy Schaefer, who came out and said there's something going on with our children, got murdered. The original parent from the McMartin trial got murdered. The Franklin case, there were people that actually disappeared, but they were able to bury that case because it literally directed itself to the White House. Look at the finders. The kids got returned. They got returned. Look up the police records. Look up that information. There's all the detailed information of the original two officers that took the kids, and took the two guys they saw the kids with hanging out outside. Animal bites, no bathing. The kids didn't know how to eat. They thought food was only for reward. They had said that they don't live inside. After everything, they said this at a police station. Two police officers, two state officials, they let them know something is wrong. They could physically see it, and they literally heard it. And they returned those children to those people with all the information that they found, with the records, the cases, the computer programs. This is what I'm saying. When people tell me, when I have conversations with people and people come out and say, that's too far-fetched. If you ever talk to me on a personal level before and I tell you that you're crazy, because I seem to be the argumentative type when it comes down to certain scenarios, listening to some of the subjects that I'll be bringing up, you'll start to realize why. Because this is the kind of stuff that I've been researching for years. And I've had nightmares about these things. And we all should. And we all should, because we all lived in a really screwed up world. We really, really do. But if we close our eyes to it, then stuff like this continues to happen. None of those people from the original cases, none of those people should be walking free. None of them. How did almost nobody, except anybody in the McMartin trial, actually see court and spoke to a judge and did any actual time? Nobody else did. Lawrence King, the only reason why he got taken was for embezzlement. They didn't get him for all the other stuff that he was doing. And like I said, this is paper trail stuff. Okay? Now, since this happened in the 80s and 90s and almost nobody had a computer, or, we didn't all have home PCs or anything like that, or laptops. It was way too expensive back then. We started changing the way that we work and the way that we keep information in order for people like that to be able to not get caught. We started to learn how to encrypt things and make things more difficult. It's mistakes like this that these kind of horrible people make, and then they learn from those mistakes. We don't learn from our mistakes. We do the same shit over and over and over again. These guys got in trouble. Did we get them locked up? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we're okay with that. But these people, they learn from their mistakes. This time, there's two guys with 6 dirty children. And mind you, the youngest that got caught that day was 2 years old. 2 years old. After this whole thing blew up, I guarantee you, people are driving around in a van like that, but they're not taking the kids out of the van. They learned their lesson. The last time they went and took the kids out of the van, this is what happened. We made it easier for people that commit these horrific crimes to get away with their crimes. They're the only ones, people that do horrific things seem to be the only ones that learn from their mistakes. The good people, the nice people, they get pushed down really quick, or I don't want to say pushed down. Some people wind up dead, and that's completely understandable when you do a certain amount of research, that you understand that certain things are buried for a reason. Okay, and don't think that for like 1 second. I have a family myself that I didn't have a couple of members telling me, hey, you sure you want to bring up some of this stuff? I do. I do. Listen, you're only going to do one of two things. You're either going to dispute me and come to me and say, well, this is absolutely false, and more power to you. I'm just happy that you did the research. But I would rather give you some type of information so you know, so you keep your eyes open, so you keep your ears open, so you understand how the system truly works. This would cut down on so many of the useless arguments of people claiming that there is a division. In the Franklin case, it was both parties. Okay? And then look at how I'm using the word parties. Both parties partying. They don't care what we see on the outside is just, it's a Photoshop photo. That's it. I want to see the original. I want to see the original. Whose intent, who's obligated to be the one good guy in that scenario? There should have been hundreds. Shit, there should have even been 5 people involved in that kind of a case. Nevertheless, hundreds. Look at in the Finders case. How many different countries were involved? China, there's people in embassies. And this is to our kids. This is to our kids. Now, if this is the problem that's going on here, we only have 100,000. 7 billion people on the planet. What do you think is happening in those other countries? Okay, because we don't seem to want to think about that too much. We can barely think about the importance of this information in our own country. And this is supposedly a place where that kind of stuff don't fly. What happens to those more outwardly corrupt? Because we're just as corrupt as most third world countries. You don't want to hear about that. You don't want to think about that. I'm fine with that. But based on what I presented here today, you should probably be thinking something else and think, holy crap, this really does spiral out of control pretty badly. Okay? And it goes to the top. And it goes to the top. So you want to fight about who's got the better political standpoint? You want to talk about who has our best interest at heart and who should be in the next election? You go ahead and you keep concerning yourself with that. You go ahead and keep concerning yourself with that. In real life, none of that stuff is relevant. In real life, these stories are relevant. In real life, ordinary people that are trying to make a difference, are being murdered every single day. And we don't want to concern ourselves with that. We want to watch TV. We want to listen to the radio. We want to go buy new things that we don't need. That's what causes things like this to not stop. And the more we keep getting out of control, the worse it's going to get. So it's time for us to stand up, to stand up and at least have sense. I'm not telling you to go run around in the streets and scream and yell and act like a crazy person. By all means, absolutely not. But at least wake up to the actual workings of this system. Stop looking at every other country and say, I'm so glad I just don't live there. Okay? Because living here, you shouldn't feel that proud with cases like this. 7 years for the McMartin trial. The Franklin case blow up. Those are major publications. That's before the monopolizing of the mainstream media. Okay? That's when journalists would come out and give you the damn news. Whether you wanted to hear it or not, they were going to give you the hardcore news. We had the Post, we had GQ, we had the Times. Those were actual publications back then that you could trust. You can't trust them now. Right now, you have to trust yourself. You have to say, I want to be able to do that on my own. I want to look for myself because I'm starting to maybe see behind the curtain. And you have to have that ability, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some strength, and it's going to take some support. But nobody's looking out. Nobody's truly looking out the way that they should. You don't have to say where you got this information from. But the next time that you have a conversation with a parent who's saying that this is bull, tell them, no, I heard otherwise. And then because I heard it, I looked it up, and that shit was legit. This stuff really happened. The videos out there surfaced. The books are out there. You know how many books about every single case except the Nancy Schaefer case are actually available on Amazon while everybody's sitting at home trying to read the Twilight sagas? Are you kidding me? But there's books about the inner corruption of the country that you live in. We have the ability to find out the truth. We have to be able to say that we're not going to take it anymore. And like I said, you do not have to revolt in that sense. There's a form of revolt that you can do with just knowledge on your own. Finding out by yourself and saying that if you have to live in a world full of people that don't want to see the truth, just because they live that way doesn't mean that you have to as well. You don't. You don't. So thank you for taking the time. I really hope that you guys got something out of this. Like I said, this was tough for me. I wanted to do 2 hours. I cannot do 2 hours of this. I just can't. Not on this topic, at least. Everything is readily available. I'm going to say the names again. We have the McMartin Trial. You can search that. We have the Franklin Scandal. The video is called Conspiracy of Silence. The ex senator that got murdered, her name is Nancy Schaefer, and she was in Georgia, so you could look that up. And we have the Finders. Now, like I said, the Finders case is one of the very rare cases that, due to the Freedom of Information Act files, you can see the actual paperwork from the police officers that initially made the arrest. And it will give you the detailed information because I have copies of all of that. You can read it and you can look through it. You can look for reference into it. You can do whatever it is that you want. Just understand that it happened and just understand that the cover ups are what is controlling everything today because we don't want to look because we keep being told that this stuff doesn't happen, that it doesn't happen here, that corruption and child sex trafficking and all that other stuff happens in all these horrific countries with these horrific governments that don't care and they're all corrupt. That is happening here. It's happening here. They want you to think it's not, but it's happening here. And I gave you a bunch of examples on where to find that it has been happening here. Don't think that because these cases are in the 80s and 90s that it's not happening now. They learn how to keep it more quiet. They learn from the mistakes. Every single case that I've mentioned came about because it came about accidentally. It didn't happen on purpose. Somebody did something that got attached to something else, and that's how it just kept spiraling out of control until everybody got busted. Lawrence King was getting in trouble for embezzlement, not for child sex trafficking, and they wound up finding that out. Thank you again for taking the time. I do sincerely appreciate it. Please feel free to leave me some feedback on our Facebook page, which is Esoteric Truth Radio, and our website, esoterictruthradio.com. This is your host, Trinity, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.